I just want to make two notes. First, we are recording this presentation so that other people who couldn't join us in real time can view it later. So that means your continued presence here is consent to recording. If you don't consent, we'll catch you next time. Have a good day. Second, I want to say thank you to Mr. Nick Schenk, who's the head of undergraduate advising services for the school, for setting this event up. And next, I want to welcome our guest panelists who will be joining me today. We have three alumni of this school. Each of them graduated. Rachel was actually a graduate student here before attending law school. Each of them was an outstanding student at UCF and is now doing wonderfully well at law school. They are each killing it, I happen to know. So Rachel is at Stetson University, Michael is at Washington University in St. Louis, and Theresa is at Marquette in Milwaukee. Where the weather is probably a little chillier than it is here. This event is really the culmination of some related ideas that Mr. Schenk had and that Rachel had and that I had. So again, thanks to each of you for making this happen. So today's session is aimed at people who are headed to law school this fall, with a focus on what to expect and how to be successful when you get there. We are not focusing on whether you should go to law school or whether you should attend law school A versus law school B, but rather we're focusing on how to succeed when you get there, if that makes sense. So without further ado, we will hit today's topics. These are the things that we're going to talk about today. For each topic, I'm going to make some comments based on my own experience and observations since about law school, and then I will ask the panelists some questions at the end of the presentation. After we've gone through our kind of discussion where I'm moderating and asking the panelists some questions, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions too. If you've done your homework in looking at law school and thinking about law school and perhaps attending this fall, and again, you're welcome to stick around if you're not attending this fall, but that's who we're primarily aimed at today. Some of these things are going to be things you've no doubt heard before, but hopefully you'll hear something new today that will be helpful in your preparation, and you're going to have the chance to ask people questions about what law school is really like. All three of our panelists are 1Ls in law school right now and have been gracious enough to peel themselves away from preparing for the next class to join us. Okay, so the first topic we're going to talk about is the law school versus undergrad and experience. And I have just kind of a grab bag of some differences or collection of some differences between undergrad, what you've experienced in undergrad and in law school. So we'll start with one, which is the workload. And we're talking about the academic workload. I know that some of you have significant employment and other obligations outside of your academic work here at UCF. But what we're talking about now is just how much work law school requires, which is a surprise, I'm sure, to no one. For those of you who've had Dr. Lanier's class or my class and you think you've read a lot, you haven't read a lot yet. So I'll turn it over to a panelist. We'll start with Rachel. Rachel, when you did it right this year so far, how many hours of reading on average do you think you did to prepare for one class? In other words, how much reading work, again, recognizing that maybe you didn't always do it all, how many hours do you think you did per class to be ready for class?
Well, let's see. It's a little difficult to separate it out into class by class because I do reading for almost every class, almost every day. But I would say that the general approach of doing reading and other study type work from 9 to 5 would be for 3 of the doctrinal classes that I'm in. So if that's 8 hours a day divided by 3, that would probably be roughly per class.
Okay, so would you say, and I know I had you as a student here when you were a graduate student, things are different in graduate school, but compared to your undergraduate experience, how does that compare? Is that roughly the same or more than your undergrad reading load?
Intensely more than the reading load in undergrad. There were definitely, I was a good student in undergrad, but there were definitely some days where I would, maybe just skim or not complete the reading in full and still be able to talk and debate in class and still perform very well. And that's not even close to an option in my experience in the law school setting. You have to do the reading to even understand what people are talking about, let alone participate on your own.
Great, thank you. Michael, what about you? What would you say your kind of average reading load is per class period?
Yeah, I don't know if I could divide it out into hours, but definitely on the days that I have class, which is pretty much every weekday, anytime I'm not in class, I'm reading, and I probably work at least until like 8 at night, probably to like, I like to finish all my work during the week, so I don't have to work too much on the weekends. But I mean, similar to what Rachel said, you're going to get called on in class. So I assume if you guys haven't heard of cold calling, which is where someone is called on in class and they say, "Hey, Michael, tell us about this case and what are the arguments and what did they say in response to this point." So to Rachel's point, you can't really afford to skim, or you need to really engage with the material pretty in depth so that you can respond intelligently when you're called on. And it's pretty much guaranteed that that will happen to you pretty regularly. So you absolutely, there's sort of a, not like a fear, but there's that pressure of being called on and looking dumb that really compels you to make sure you're thoroughly engaging with the material.
Good. And I want to pick up that idea of the Socratic method in just a second. Um, One other kind of difference with the reading is not only is the quantity of reading significantly greater, but the nature of the reading is greater. And talking about the difference between a casebook and a textbook, the casebooks that those students who are attending today may be familiar with. If you've taken a law class in undergrad, for example, a class with me, a class with Dr. Lanier, maybe a class with Dr. Edwards, and others, they're really casebooks light. And what I mean by that is the case cuts that we have in our undergrad level law books are significantly shorter than they tend to be in law school. Theresa, you had a class with me, and you may remember in Con Law 2 kind of what a case cut was like in terms of the length of it. How does a law school case cut compare with what you experienced as an undergrad?
Yeah, so I was going to mention, if you've taken a class with Professor Merriam, you know what the reading might look like, or a little bit. It is very different. We get the opinion. Sometimes maybe not the full opinion, but we get a good chunk of it, and then you'll get 2, maybe 3 concurrences, perhaps a dissent. So it is longer. It's more in depth. It does deal with a lot of different, than what we would see in undergrad. Definitely not a textbook. Does not compare to what a case book is, but there is a good amount of just content. You might do the reading once, and you might not understand a single word that you just read. So I think that also plays a part in the length of time that you're spent reading. It's not, oh, it takes me an hour to read one case. It takes me an hour to understand a case, to read what they're saying, look up words that I might not know, because that is a thing. You're not going to understand every single word that you read in a case that you come across. And so I feel like all those things put together is what makes the reading take longer and really have you sit down and study way more than you might have even thought of doing in undergrad, because it's just rushing through and then regurgitating. You have to deeply understand what you're reading on these pages, and that makes a difference. So I'd say that's one of the biggest things for sure.
Great. Thank you. I think you can all see that one of the themes from all 3 of our student panelists so far is you got to do the reading, and it takes a long time. And I promise you, I didn't just handpick them because they're telling you the message that the professor wants you to hear. It really is true. In undergrad, you can often skate by with skimming the reading, have a general understanding of what's going on, and you just can't do that in law school. You have to have actually not, and I think Theresa made the point very well, not only have done the reading, but understood the reading, so that when the professor calls on you in class, you're actually able to engage in a real way with the material that they're expecting you to have read and understood. And I want to turn now to the point that Michael mentioned about the Socratic method. I'm sure those of you who are planning to go to law school this fall have at least heard of the Socratic method. And that's really the Socratic, meaning Socrates. The way in which he taught was to ask questions. And that's the way law professors teach. And I'll tell you one thing, and I'm going to ask the panelists here in a minute about this, but one thing that's significantly different between undergrad and law school is that the goal of the professor in law school is often not to tell you what the law is or to help you understand it better. The goal is primarily to get you to think about it and to think about it from different angles. So, at the end of some classes that I teach, and certainly like at the end of a block before we have an exam, I summarize what we've learned, and this is, what you should have taken away from this case, and this is how we go about, analyzing an equal protection issue, those kinds of things. In law school, you often don't get that, right? You are expected to come up with the synthesis of your understanding of what it is that you are supposed to have taken away. And that's a really different, so you're not going to raise your hand at the end of a class and say, so professor, what were we supposed to have learned today? And at least in my experience, I walked out of a lot of classes feeling like, I'm not sure what we were supposed to learn today. So I need to look at my notes, and I need to look back at the reading, and I need to try to figure out, or maybe talk to a classmate, what were we supposed to learn from today? Michael, can you talk a little bit more about what the Socratic method is like in terms of in actual practice? And again, every professor does it a little bit differently, but what has your experience been?
Sure. So obviously it's a little different that we've done most of our school virtually. I don't know if that's true for the other panelists here, but generally at the start of class, pretty much the only thing that happens in class is that the professor will call on someone. Some of my professors will stay with the same person the whole class. So you're on call for like an hour for several cases, and then some people jump around. But generally the professor is going to ask you to dissect the case and explain what the arguments were, what the holding is, and sort of what the significance of that case is. And they kind of lead you along like, okay, well, let's look at this other idea. Like they'll nudge you in a general direction, but it's pretty much the student who's responsible for explaining what that case is about to the professor. And then it's kind of like the professor is guiding the student to making an intelligent statement of the law. And then I guess one other piece of that is that even when you're not on call, I think that's been more challenging for me, is understanding what to do when you're not the person on call and trying to like follow the discussion that's happening so that you can get some valuable information.
Good point, because sometimes what the other student in the class is saying in response to the questions isn't helpful or valuable information. It's in fact wrong, for example, and you're basically as a student expected to kind of figure that out on your own. Theresa, I think you've had a few more in-person classes. Can you share what your experience has been with the Socratic method?
Yeah, so at Marquette, we actually have been in person since fall. So I've been all in person this entire year. I think for at least fall, it was more so like Michael was talking about how professors would ask, maybe like procedural posture, or what are the facts about this case, and try and get a specific student to answer and just be on call for that specific case and try to have a conversation to pull out important things that maybe everyone should notice or what they think stood out. I think this semester, it's a little bit different. I have one professor, he calls on 3 people, but kind of very similar to what Professor Merriam did. So he calls on 3 people for the entire day. It is a cold call because you don't know who those 3 people are going to be until you get in class, but at least once he calls your name, it's you and you're going to get a question whenever it is. It's constitutional law. His are more open-ended. Why do you think this judge is doing this? Or how do you connect these 2 things together? So that's really interesting, and it's different to my Civ Pro professor, who he's a sniper. He will be looking at the other side of the class and call someone who's on the other side. And that one, you could get a question from him at any time. It doesn't matter. He doesn't stick to one person. He'll just call Theresa, what is rule 8, whatever. And so you just have to be aware always. So that's the difference. Even, well, like Michael said, if someone's on call, they're going to be on call the whole class, your nerves kind of calm down and you could just focus on understanding what somebody else is saying. Whereas, it has its pros and cons. In the Civ Pro, you're always alert. You're always nervous, but you're always alert and paying attention to what's going on. So that's at least my experience for in-person on calls.
Great, thanks for sharing that. And I think that's pretty representative of most people's experience in law school, which is some professors are not going to tell you in advance who's getting called on. Some professors are going to tell you in advance who's getting called on. Sometimes they don't tell you, but you can kind of figure out that they're walking, moving around the room in terms of who's going to get called on and so forth. You can have a wide variety of experience, but being prepared for class by having intensely done the reading and really understanding it's going to be critical to success there. A few other differences between law school and undergrad, I'll just mention quickly. Some of these we're going to talk about a little bit more in a moment. In many courses in law school, one exam will determine your entire grade for the course. When that's the case, it's often the case the professor will also say, And your class participation can count for a bonus or a subtraction if you don't do well or something like that, to kind of incentivize people to be ready and prepared in class. But that's kind of a big difference. I imagine that as undergrads, most of you do not have situations where one assignment makes up your entire grade. And as we'll talk about in more detail in a moment, grades in law school are super important. And so the idea that everything boils down to your performance on one exam at the end of the semester is certainly stress inducing. We'll talk a little bit about how to deal with that and how to prepare for that in a moment. It's often true that in law schools, and this is not necessarily true at every law school. In fact, I know it's not true at every law school, but there's often a very strict grading curve. That means the vast majority of people have only are going to get a grade right in the middle of the bell curve, right? So if the school or the professor has a B curve, the vast majority of people in class are going to get a B. And for every person who gets an A, somebody's going to get a C or a worse grade. At my law school, it was mathematically precise to 2 decimal points what the GPA had to be in the class in terms of what the professors were allowed to give. So they had no discretion. It was a school-wide policy there. So just be aware that at your particular school, wherever you end up attending, there might be a very strict grading curve. And the fact that there's such a strict grading curve may produce a little bit of competition because if there are only 3 A's to be given out in the class, of course, everybody wants those 3 A's, and that can tend to produce a little bit of a competitive atmosphere. Another big difference is that in your first year of law school, the vast majority, and this varies again from law school to law school as well, the vast majority of your courses will be selected for you and your professors. And later on in your career, sometimes it starts in the second semester of your first year, and at every law school I'm familiar with, you mostly have choice in your second and third years of law school. But it's very common in your first year to have no choice, particularly in your first semester. Like you show up, they give you your schedule. This is the professor you have. This is the time your class will be. And this is what courses you're taking. That's because most law schools have kind of a required, what we think of as like general education courses in the undergrad world, but they make you take certain courses like contracts and civil procedure and torts and property in your first year, constitutional law perhaps. And everybody has to take them whether you want to or not. I mentioned competition a moment ago, and I'm going to ask in just a second for the panelists to each talk about their respective schools. You've probably already, if you're headed to law school this fall, you've probably already figured out that different schools have different reputations for how competitive they are. Some schools have reputations for being super collegial, where people really genuinely get along, even though everybody's competing for the same jobs and everybody's competing for the same grades. At other schools, it's pretty cutthroat, and people are willing to do whatever it takes to compete and succeed in getting those jobs and getting the grades that people want. So Rachel, let me turn to you. This is not in any way to talk negatively or positively about your own schools, but just what's your general perception of how competitive or collegial, or where Stetson is on that spectrum of between competitive and collegial?
Sure. So Stetson as an institution, meaning like the professors and the administration, really impress upon us that these are going to be our colleagues and we should be collegial. And unfortunately, I don't think that always translates to how the students behave and perform, because I've never felt like I was in such a competitive area before. And it's kind of jarring to hear the professors say these things and then to see some students act in a much more competitive way. It definitely adds to the stress, but I think that like the competitive nature of law school can also help be a like place of motivation and to help like encourage you to do better. But there's definitely a little bit of disparity in my experience in what the institution says we should approach, how the institution says we should approach it, and then how it actually is approached by the students.
And can you either give us some examples or an example of how that competitiveness shows up, or talk about what you think is motivating that competitiveness from some students?
Yeah, I think what motivates it is easier. So I'll start with that one. And I think that's just the nature of law school attracts a ton of type A students. We are generally the highest performing students from all of our schools. We're used to doing well. And when you're thrown into a group of all people that have that background, you know, everybody isn't always on top anymore. And that is different for a lot of students to feel. It was certainly different for me to feel. I thought that I was going to be coming in with like this great advantage because I had graduate education. And then I realized that I don't know the same amount of things that my colleagues don't know. And then why that is, I think I just answered that. And I'm sorry, I forgot what your other question was.
In what ways has competitiveness shown up? In other words, what kinds of things do people maybe do that show you, or is it more just a general feeling?
I think it's a general feeling, but I also think that the actions of some people definitely encourage that. After the first semester, there was a big shift and a big trend of friend groups to kind of align where the rankings came out and things of that nature, which was very interesting to me. And then also COVID kind of makes things very difficult in terms of socializing. My classes are, I have 3 in-person classes and then just my writing class online. So we were all together, but there wasn't a lot of chance for social interaction because, you know, the masks, the sitting far apart and things of that nature. But then after I would perform well in an on-call setting or in competitions that were extracurricular, I saw that a lot more people that were known to be at the top of the class and things of that nature were approaching me and asking to work on things. And that just kind of added to, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I wonder why this is happening now.
Right. Now you care about me.
Precisely.
Got it. Okay. And you know, I think that's a double-edged sword, right? I think one of the things that's tough about being in the law school environment is that it is the top, you know, the top 10% from undergrads, whereas those of you who are in the audience today who are undergrads now, you know, maybe you feel like only 10% of any given class really is motivated or cares as much as you do about the course and is trying as hard as you are. And 90% of the class is on somewhere on the spectrum of don't care at all to mildly care. In law school, it's very much the opposite, right? 90% of your classmates care and care a lot and really want that A and are striving to do well. And maybe only 10% are kind of on somewhere on that. Not really sure why they're in law school because they don't seem to care to be there in the first place. Theresa, let me just quickly ask you, in terms of competitive versus collegial, what's your experience been like at Marquette?
Yeah, so mine's actually quite the opposite, which I'm very happy about because I really enjoy the setting at Marquette. From the beginning, orientation day one, they were like, look around you, these are your future colleagues. And I'm not talking just about students, but your professors as well. And so it was ingrained from the beginning, like these are people you have to respect. And, you know, you guys are all going through this together. Law school is a beast and you might as well have people to go down that road with you. In every environment, I feel like it's been really great to have a support group. 2Ls, 3Ls, 1Ls that might understand a topic, they are so willing to help that it is amazing. I genuinely have not encountered a more giving group of people that just reach out because they want to help, because they've gone through it before, or you know, if they're struggling to learn something, so might as well group with someone that could help you and then you could help, or vice versa. You know, there's no doubt that getting that A is incredibly important and you're fighting for the grades. And, you know, we have a curve where only 30% can get honors grades, just B+ or higher. So those honors grades are up for grabs and you want to get them as much as possible. But I feel like the overall feeling in Marquette is like, we might as well help each other get there. You know, you don't lose anything with trying to study with someone and both of you gaining something. You know, at the end of the day, it's your exam. You're going to do how you study for it, but there's other people that can help you, and people are willing to be that person for, you know, somebody else. So I feel very lucky and I like the environment. You know, I care a lot about my grades, but, you know, I think it's also important to help other. I'm not going to, oh, you don't understand that topic, I'm not going to tell you how to start. Like, that's not how the environment is, and I appreciate it. So I'm very happy with this environment that Marquette fosters.
Cool. And I think those two experiences, and by the way, I'm not asking this question of people because there's a right or a wrong way. If you're a particularly competitive person and you thrive in an environment where it's competitive juices all the time, I want to win, you probably want to be in a law school where that's the accepted social norm. And if you're more of the kind of person who's like, no, let's get along, let's work together, let's, you know, I'm a group person or a collective person, or I want to succeed through everyone's success, then you'll probably be happier at a school that has more of a reputation for being collegial. What's interesting is, and I think Rachel and Theresa's experience demonstrates this, the schools meaning the administration, the professors, almost everywhere try to say we should be collegial. It's just that that's not the real social atmosphere in various schools. And so if the extent to which a school is competitive or collegial, and it's not those two things are mutually exclusive, but they kind of tend towards one or the other. For those of you who are going to law school this fall and haven't yet decided where you're going to school, that would be something to ask students about, or maybe if you have the ability to ask more than one student about, particularly if one of those two types of environments appeals more to you. I want to just very quickly, you can see all the other things we're going to talk about in a moment. So if it happens to be one of these things, we don't need to talk about it just yet. But I want to ask each of our panelists, wrapping up this idea of law school versus undergrad, what has been the biggest difference between undergrad and law school? If you could think of one for you, and Theresa, we'll come right back to you. What's been kind of, if you just the biggest difference, what's that been?
The amount of content that you learn. I learned a lot of undergrad, I studied, but I can say my first semester of law school, I learned more than I did in my 3 years of undergrad. It was just so much that's coming at you at all the time. And sometimes it can be overwhelming, but it's so rewarding because you're just like, wow, like this is what I'm here for, just to learn and to be a sponge and open up to all these new topics. And it's just the biggest difference, and one of the things that I like the most, just the amount of content that you're learning day in and day out.
That's great. And for those of you who haven't had the experience yet, Theresa, I would say would probably agree with me. It's not just a surface level content understanding either, right? So the quantity isn't only the number of different topics, but you're learning a gazillion different topics at an incredible depth at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah.
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 Michael, what about you? What's been the kind of biggest, if you had to point to one, what's been the biggest difference in your law school experience versus your undergrad experience, perhaps aside from COVID?
Sure. I was going to give you a heads up. If you meant to have your screen shared right now, I cannot see it. I'm not sure if that's true for everybody.
My screen share stopped. All right, let me figure that out. Go ahead.
But yeah, I'll share. I think definitely like the order of when you learn things is kind of reversed. So whereas in undergrad, I feel like you kind of prime yourself in getting exposed to the information before class. And then it's like, oh, if I don't fully understand this, once I get to class, the professor will clarify it and I'll have a great understanding. Whereas in law school, if I'm reading the case and I recognize that I don't have a great understanding of this now, I need to go back and read it again and figure out what's going on because I want to come to class prepared versus coming to class with the expectation that like the professor will clarify it for you. Because then if you're on call, you don't have much to say.
And let me ask you one quick follow-up on that, Michael. Do you find, I mentioned earlier that it's not really the professor's pedagogical goal to tell you what you need to know or to tell you what the law is. It's to help you discover that for yourself. Has that been your experience? Is that true? In other words, if you show up to class not knowing what's going on, you're likely to leave class not knowing what's going on?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And just also the nature, I guess, of the Socratic method is you're hearing two people have a conversation. And if you don't come in already with like knowledge of the facts of the case and what was in dispute and like where the arguments turned on, you're just hearing two people talk about something that you really don't understand. And it's not going to help you much to hear a conversation like in a different language, basically, that you really don't have the baseline knowledge to extract what's valuable.
Great, thanks. Rachel, what about you? Quickly, what do you think's been the biggest difference?
I definitely think it's the classroom setting. I'm a very active learner. So in undergrad and grad school, I was very happy to participate often and ask questions. And it's really more passive in law school where you sit back and you participate when you're asked to, especially with the microphone situation with Corona. And hopefully that won't necessarily be my experience the whole time. But it's definitely, I typically like a more active role where I can ask questions and learn kind of on my time, but that's not so much the experience in law school.
Great, thank you. All right, we're going to turn to academic success now. That's probably the most important topic we're going to talk about. I promise not all of these topics take the same amount of time as the differences between law school and undergrad. The first thing you can see that I suggest and that you've heard from all three panelists now is read, read, read. And that means being fully prepared for class, every class. And it's because law school, kind of like math, if you remember math classes in in high school or in college, the classes build on the last class. And if you're lost this class and don't get unlost before next class, you're going to be lost next class too. And that's just kind of a snowball effect. So you've really got to be ready and on top of things the whole time. And the primary way to do that is to do the reading yourself. This really, law is the professors help some, but it really is an exercise in learning for yourself. I think we've beat the dead horse on that one. So let's move on to outlines. Outlines are something you're going to hear about over and over and over again in law school. It may be natural to think, well, an outline must just be my notes, right? And kind of that's right. But let me ask one of our panelists. Michael, we'll turn to you. What is a law school outline?
So an outline is a big document, usually like 20 to 30 pages, that just kind of goes through everything you've learned in that class. And the idea is that you use this outline while you're taking the exam to sort of find the piece of the law that you're dealing with and sort of have a quick condensed version of your notes so that you know what to do. So like for my torts class, I have a page about all these different elements for a certain tort. And then I have like 3 or 4 different notes of, oh, here's an exceptional circumstance that I should be aware of in case that comes on the test. And outlines are also just creating the outline is a tool to help you study because you're going to review all the notes and everything you've done over the course of the class and kind of compile it all into one document. But then also it's a tool you use on the exam to quickly reference all the knowledge you have. So I assume this is true for everyone. Our exams are all open note and open book. And honestly, if you don't have the for most things, even if you have the book in front of you, if you only have a couple of hours, there's just no way that you would benefit from flipping through the book and finding the answers. You really have to have the information easily accessible and have thought about it before. So a lot of people make their outlines through the course of the year, which I think is probably the right way to do it. Otherwise, you're kind of going back and trying to reread your hundreds of pages of notes or whatever in like the last 2 weeks. But that is it. A lot of people share or exchange outlines is not uncommon, or we have a like an online outline bank on a Google Drive that people exchange. But maybe you had mentioned competitiveness. I imagine that is less common, but at least here it seems like there's some basic outlines. There's like the regular outline bank, and then I know of the existence of a Google Drive with like superior outlines that I don't have access to. So maybe that's part of it.
Special club. Yeah. So as Michael says, the outlines are you distilling basically or synthesizing everything you've learned that you think is important in the course of the semester. And that should come, I would suggest, primarily from your class notes, because if the professor is focused on it in class with her discussions with students, it probably matters to the professor and therefore it may matter on the exam. And then your reading as well. And Michael alluded to this, but there are some really important reasons to do this yourself. First of all, because it forces you to distill and synthesize for yourself what you have learned. It helps you figure out where all the different pieces of law in that topic, for example, tax, right? Tax law includes a ton of different areas and a ton of different concepts. By creating the outline yourself, you are forcing yourself to think about, well, how does this type of income tax differ from this type of ad valorem tax? Or how does this type of income tax differ from this other type of income tax? By going through and creating an outline for yourself, you are figuring out how the different pieces of what you learned that semester fit together. And when you create your own outlines, you're having to write down your own understanding of the law in that area. And in order to write down your own understanding of the law in that area, you have to understand the law in that area. So Michael mentioned it's a tool, not just for working on the exam and doing well on the exam. It's a tool for the actual learning process itself. In other words, the creation of the outline is perhaps the most important learning you will do all semester because it is that distillation and it ensures you actually do understand the material. It sounds like Michael's had all open book and open note exams. That's not true at every school. Some schools, it's up to the professor and you might have some closed book exams. Then the outline is helping you prepare for what you have to memorize. In other words, what you need to know walking in and in the open book exams, again, it's a reference for you during the exam. Michael mentioned the fact that you don't have really time to be looking up answers. I think it's common, I've at least experienced with my own undergraduate students, that when a book is open book, when an exam is open book, there's certainly the temptation to not prepare as much for the exam. That is a major, major, major mistake if you try to do that in law school and think that you're just going to look up the answers as you go along. There simply won't be time, and you're going to get a bad grade. You have to be 100% prepared as if it were a closed book exam with your outlines, fully understanding everything before you go in. But then if it is open book, open note, you have that reference in case you forget something or something jogs another idea you want to go to. Michael also mentioned one other thing I had in my notes to talk about, which is people kind of have different attitudes about when to start creating your outlines. Some people wait till the end of the semester. Like, I want to learn everything there is, and then I'm going to start distilling my information. My personal recommendation to you is that you start from day one, meaning you building your semester, your outlines all semester long, not from the halfway point or not 2 weeks before the exam, all semester long. That way you, and after class, you review your outline from both the, or kind of synthesize, create your outline from the reading notes that you took perhaps, and the class notes, to then, okay, on this particular topic, this is what I need to know, here it is. Now I'm done with that. All you have to do is review it at the end of the semester. Michael also mentioned sharing outlines. That'll be an opportunity that everybody will have at every law school. And it's not that sharing an outline is an inherently bad idea. You can also buy commercial outlines, and sometimes the commercial outlines, meaning a publishing company produces them. Sometimes those commercial outlines are actually keyed to a particular textbook. So you can, if you have John Doe's textbook on constitutional law, you can buy the outline for John Doe's textbook on constitutional law. Again, those things aren't inherently bad, but the way to use those is as a check on your own outline after you think you have finished your own outline, rather than as the kind of basis for creating your outline. That's the shortcut. That's the Cliff's Notes version, right? Just buy somebody else's outline or get a friend's outline and use that and read over it and say, I'm good to go. You probably can pass a course that way, but you are not going to get a great grade relying on somebody else's understanding of the law. The point of the outline is that you understand the law itself. So you're really robbing yourself of learning when you're relying on someone else's outline. Let's talk about exam prep. We don't have time to fully cover outlines. By the way, I mentioned in one of the last bullets here that you will have future opportunities to learn how to do these things that we're only kind of scratching the surface on now. So it's likely that at some point during your law school orientation, early on in law school, or perhaps a month into the semester, a student organization or a group of professors will put on a how to do an outline class. Same thing is true for what I'm about to talk about now, which is exam preparation. We don't have time to fully discuss how to prepare for exams, but there are strategies, and those strategies are not the same as preparing for an undergrad exam. Writing a law school exam means typically lots of long essay writing in very short periods of time. You have to be prepared long in advance. You should read up on it, attend whatever law school sessions you can go to that discuss how to prepare for and how to write good exams. And then you should take practice exams. At the vast majority of law schools, professors, not all of them, but most of them, or some of them at least, make available their prior exams. So you can look at the 2020 spring constitutional law exam for Professor Smith and see what she asked. And sometimes she'll even include a model A answer that you should be taking those exams yourself, those practice exams, then comparing your answer to what Professor Smith thinks an A answer is. And what you're going to notice is that different professors have different ideas of what an A answer is. But if you have those resources made available to them, you should definitely do that. Let's turn it back to the panelists for a moment. Panelists, let's assume for a moment that you've made the best outline on the planet, right? You've attended the classes on how to make an outline. Maybe you've watched a couple good YouTube videos on how to do a good outline. So you've got the best outline already. What else is important in preparing for and doing well on an exam? And Rachel, let's start with you.
Practice problems, practice problems, practice problems. I did not study with practice problems a lot in the first semester, but I've been using them a lot for this coming semester, and I feel so much more prepared and so much more confident as we come into my finals are in 2 weeks. And when the exam is just full essays, and that's more than half of the exam, you want to make sure you're practicing your writing skills and making sure you know how to apply the rule of law to the issue that the question is asking and applying it to the facts of your hypothetical. And that can't be done through understanding and having the perfect outline. You just have to practice with the writing. And like I said, that makes me feel really happy about finals this time. And I didn't think that was a feeling I'd be feeling right now.
Cool. Theresa, what about you? What do you think the most important key to exam success is? Apart
Yeah,
from the
I agree with what Rachel said. Practice exams, especially when those professors post any past exams, you have to take a look at those so that you know what's coming. A lot of professors typically write the same way. It's not going to be the same problem, but it might be the same basis of what they're looking for you to analyze. And on top of that, I would say is knowing your professor, going, maybe you write a sample or an example, and if they have the model answer, look at what they're looking for. Some professors like when you introduce a counter argument, that'll get you an extra 2 points on that issue. Or they like if you expand on there's 2 different ways to look at a law, talk about both. So you really have to know who you're writing to. And that could be by talking to somebody who took the class previously, or, if you're going to your professor's office hours. Additionally, going off outlines and exam prep, I think one of the best ways is when you're looking at your outline, comparing it to somebody else's, whether it be someone that took the class or somebody that is in your class. And if there's anything that isn't matching up, you have to go talk to your professor, because that means that either one of you is right or neither of you is right. So understanding what you know and what you don't know is very important, because that way you have to get it cleared up before the exam, because there's no saving you if you come in and aren't sure what's coming or what you're talking about, and then you have to write about it. So I think it's important to expand what you know, research what you don't know, and then just practice. Like Rachel said, those practice exams are the key to getting comfortable with the law that you're about to write about.
Great, thank you. So that leads us to our next topic, because all those suggestions for how to do well on exams require time, as does reading and being prepared for every class. This is just an unfortunate reality. For many of you, great students in undergrad, you're able to take shortcuts here and there to and still do really well, either because you're super smart or because you're lucky or some combination of those things, and because undergrad is just a different experience than law school. There is absolutely no substitute in the study of law, and then frankly, later in the practice of law, for putting in the hours. You have got, if you want to do well in law school, you have to take it seriously. It has to be your primary focus. I understand that my information and my experience is quite a bit older than our other panelists, so I encourage you to listen to what they have to say on this. But if I have 2 big pieces of advice from this whole presentation today to take away, the first one I've already mentioned, which is to do your own outlines for every class. And the second one is treat law school like a full-time job. And I don't just mean put in that number of hours. I mean, pretend you're clocking in whatever time works for you. They have people who are morning people and people who are not morning people. I know on the panel, we have morning people and non-morning people. We have people who are, who have their classes that are scheduled for them, maybe at a time that they don't like, but whenever that time is for you, if it's 9 to 6 or 9 to 7, you clock in. You are a law student all day. That is your job. And then at the end of the evening, you turn it off so that you can rest your brain and prepare for the next day again. I think the people who do not do well in law school take forward the college experience, which is, yeah, I'll go to class for an hour and then I've got some Ultimate to play, and then I'll go hang with my friends for lunch, and then I'll play some video games, or maybe I'll catch up on binging, whatever show I'm watching on Netflix. That can work just fine in college because you're able to piece together enough time to get, and with whether shortcuts or just you're super smart. That approach doesn't work in law school. The people who don't treat law school like a job really suffer. But I do think that you can do really well in law school, fantastically well in law school, by working 9 to 7 during the week. And as Michael says, he tries to do taking the weekend off. That is no kidding doable. But it means that 9 to 7 was hard at work the entire time, whether attending class, doing the reading, working on your outlines, whatever assignment you were trying to work on. So no real shortcut for putting in the time one way or another. Speaking of that, I mentioned you may be working on an assignment. You typically have a legal research and writing course, at least one, if not both semesters of your first year of law school. That's a super important course. There you will have multiple assignments, but in the vast majority of other courses, the courses we refer to usually as substantive courses, like civil procedure or property or contracts, usually, as I mentioned earlier, there's only one assignment that is the final exam. And so all of your preparation and really all you're thinking about, okay, I want to get a good grade in this course. How do I do that? It needs to be focused on how can I walk into that exam room ready to go and write an awesome exam in the 3 or 4 hours that I'm given to answer these questions. I'll mention that law school has changed some since I went. When I went to law school, in my 3 years of law school, I had a grand total of zero law school exam questions that weren't essay exam questions. In other words, I never had one multiple choice question, never had a fill in the blank, never had a short answer. Every single question on every single exam when I was in law school was an essay. That has changed some, and different professors are different, but just be aware that that's going to be different than your undergrad experience. I've already mentioned the grades curving and how the impact of that. So the only last thing I want to mention about grades right now is that this is a really unfortunate reality. And I don't in any way mean to add pressure, because everyone is stressed out in their first semester of law school. So I'm not saying this to add pressure. I'm saying this to prepare you. Your 1L grades are probably the most important grades you're going to have in law school. In other words, the grades you have in your first semester primarily, and second semester as well. And the reason is those grades are going to dictate what job opportunities you have in your first summer after your 1L year. And those grades are going to dictate what the employers, or those grades are what the employers are going to see when you're in the second year, first semester, so fall of your second year hiring period, which is the most critical hiring period during law school. You'd think it was in your last year, and that's certainly important if you don't have a job lined up yet. But many people have their jobs already in place after their second summer, because in the fall of their second year, they got offers to be clerks or interns or summer associates at some place in the summer of after their second year, and that's where they get a permanent job offer later. I'm not trying to tell you that's the only way. Many public service positions actually hire later, so there isn't as much an emphasis on what your first year grades are. But it's unfortunate that while you're trying to get the whole hang of this law school thing, those are the grades that matter most. But that's why that first semester of law school is so stressful, and why even though it's an unfortunate reality, it is the reality you really need to be focused on doing well in that first semester. Panelists, before I move on to professional success, anything you want to add with regard to grading? Any of you?
Yes, I do want to add something just to maybe relieve this stress that Merriam might have just added a little bit more. Grades are important. Obviously, we've known this through undergrad, now law school, but so is connections and networking. You could have the best grades ever, but if you are sitting in an interview and your personality doesn't match, or your attitude is a bad attitude, that is going to cost you. And you can meet people who might have lower grades than somebody else, but get the job over them because they're able to express themselves and network with different people. I'd say networking is a really big part of it as well. If you haven't started, start now. Set up your LinkedIn as an undergrad. But I just, to take the pressure off, grades, always important. Always got to strive to do the best. But so is taking advantage, taking those opportunities, and just making smart moves. Talk to people, learn from different attorneys, and that could also give you a leg up and a little bit less of stress if you didn't do the best that you thought you wanted to do. Just there's also, don't give up hope then. You could still do great.
Thanks. Any of the other panelists? Okay, that leads beautifully into professional success. As Theresa mentioned, grades are not the only way to get a job. Connections are another way to get a job. And that's either connections you build while you're in law school, or connections you perhaps already have. If your mom already is a partner at a firm and she's told you she's going to hire you when you get done with law school, congratulations. That takes a lot of the stress of finding a job away from you. But professional relationships matter. And Theresa mentioned LinkedIn. You'll probably be beat over the head when you go to law school about having a LinkedIn account. It probably to an annoying degree, but I used LinkedIn profile pictures for all 4 of us who are talking to you today to help illustrate that point. is that you will need a LinkedIn presence, and that's just one symptom, perhaps not an illness, maybe symptom's the wrong word, one indication of what you're trying to do professionally. It's important to remember, first and foremost, law school is a professional school. So yes, it's academic, you're learning things, but the point of law school is to become a lawyer. And so professional success is going to come primarily from academic success, but also comes from connections. For those of you fortunate enough to go to a big name school, you might get a job offer just because of the name on your diploma, the name other than your name that's on your diploma. But in any event, recognizing from the beginning that people are going to be potential professional connections is important. And I don't want to suggest to anyone that you need to start only looking at people in light of how they can help you professionally. In fact, I think that's a terrible way to live life. Be a good human being, but recognize, oh, this professor that I really like is in an area that I might want to practice in. Maybe I should go to visit her office hours after class and talk a little bit to get to know her. Maybe she'll write me a recommendation letter because she actually knows me and doesn't know the 99 other people in my class who she calls on, but can't really say anything about other than they got X grade in my class. So the focus of nearly everyone in law school is on getting a job. Most everyone wants to practice law in some capacity or another. Some people want to teach law, which has its own special kind of requirements and approach. So what I'm saying is not surprising that you need to be focused on professional success, but just make sure that in your actions, in your behavior, that you are leading toward professional success from the beginning and aren't only thinking of yourself anymore as a student, where all I need to do, and Theresa mentioned this, made the point really well, all I need to do is be a good student and everything else will take care of itself. That's not true in the professional environment. You have to also be concerned about establishing a professional reputation and establishing those connections as well. So you can hurt your career by things you do in law school, whether they are things that are dishonest and actually disqualify you from getting admitted to the bar, or things that just you get a reputation for being a bad person or a dishonest person, untrustworthy person. I have a number of people who are law school classmates of mine who've been secretaries of federal agencies or who have been important appellate court judges or who have other significant positions of influence. How dumb would it have been if I, during law school, was an a-hole to them? I don't play on those relationships all the time, trying to get them to do things for me, but at least knowing you've maintained relationships that you can hopefully call on if you need them in the future is a wise approach. I want to switch gears to lifestyle really quickly, and then we'll open it up to questions. You can have a life while you're in law school. And that's if you take the law school time seriously and do your job as a law student and do that in a kind of predictable and serious way. I still think you can have a life, but I'm going to actually ask the panelists if they think you can have a life. How has work-life balance worked out for you or not worked out for you during law school? Let's start with Rachel.
I think the work-life balance is definitely possible, but like you said, you have to put in the time where it matters. So I think I mentioned earlier, as an undergrad, I was definitely one of the students that Professor Merriam was talking about in terms of, sometimes I would skim the reading and not do everything completely well, and I would still do fantastically. So coming to law school, it was definitely an adjustment the first semester to learn how to do work early, which was such a foreign idea to me. Do today was usually my go-to. So once I learned to do work early and get things out of the way so I could plan for like specific social events that I wanted to attend or going home for the weekend, I was really able to get that done. And then I think the work-life balance that I've also mostly benefited from is learning how to do activities that really help with stress relief and getting my mind off of school for a few. So I've really started going to the gym and doing yoga a lot more, which sounds funny. Everybody always says those are good stress relief ways, and I've never done them before, but they really genuinely are. So to make time for those things that I really want to do and the people that I really want to see is really possible as long as you dedicate yourself to doing work early and getting things out of the way so you're not so stressed. So there's no such thing as catching up on reading. We have too much reading to barely get done, in the amount of time we do. If you're doubling it because you didn't do the reading last week, there's really no catching up.
Great, thank you. Michael, what about you? How has work-life balance worked or not worked for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and also I think COVID influences some of this. So there's not a whole lot to do anyway, which I think is a factor. But I definitely agree, and I have the philosophy that if I have more work to get done and there's something I want to do, I need to get that work done. And I think it's you should at least recognize that law school is only 3 years, which I mean only like it's obviously not the most pleasant thing, but how well you do in law school has a big impact on your legal career afterwards. So if you need to buckle down for 3 years and have a little bit less fun, I think that's a worthwhile trade-off. I try to read a week ahead for every class. So like I do the next week's reading like that day, which I think can be helpful because then if I want to do something, I'm already have that week's reading done. So I can like take a couple days off. Or if I have like we mentioned the legal writing stuff, if you have writing assignments to do, you have to find a way to sort of budget that in to your normal reading time. So I think it is doable, but I definitely agree what you had mentioned earlier about sort of being efficient with your work time. You need to dedicate some work time and have a minimum quantity of work that you need to get done. And then once you kind of have your bases covered, you can take a mild amount of time off, usually just on the weekends for me to have a little bit of a break.
Great. Theresa, how about you?
Yeah, Michael, you amaze me. A week ahead, I couldn't do that. But for me, I do think it's very doable. I think this past year, scheduling has been a key part of my life. I have like at least 3 calendars to make sure I know everything that's going on. Just because there is so much, not just schoolwork, but like if you have to do an interview or you're meeting with somebody. So I think really being aware of your time and the time that you have to do school related things versus, time to yourself is very important to be knowledgeable and aware of that time because you want to use it to your advantage. Like Rachel, I think working out and, removing yourself from the school or from your apartment if you're doing, virtual school is so important because you're just surrounded by it. You just have to go take a walk, go do something. And like, it sounds very basic, but it is such a big, just weight off your shoulders to take some time and get away from just law school for, 30 minutes, an hour. Like you'll be okay taking, a little break. It's going to be more beneficial for you than it is to just power through and like not do anything for yourself, because that's just going to be more draining and make it harder because you're not enjoying it. You should be able to enjoy it to some extent. It's not going to be the most fun you've ever had, but it should be something that you're happy that you're doing. And I think involving outside activities, whether it be, like Michael said, it's not, COVID has put a little halt on things, but like getting lunch with a friend or law school, talk about something different. I think is really important to manage your life and lifestyle and time.
Awesome. Thank you. I really think, I mentioned earlier the idea that you should treat it like a job. Law school is the beginning of your career. And you're going to have a job by definition, you're going to have a job for your entire career. And the idea that you're going to have to block out, this is work time. And now I'm going to, work is over for the day. So I'm going to take a mental break or take a Sunday off and not work and those kinds of things. If you treat law school like you're going to have to treat the rest of your professional career, you're in a much better situation than if you treat law school like you're still an undergrad, in my opinion. There are a bunch of other ways to learn about how to be successful in law school. Every law school that I'm aware of has some kind of orientation for new students. Often, as I mentioned earlier, you also have the opportunity to attend sessions on how to do an outline, attend sessions on what a good exam answer looks like, what it includes, how to organize your exam answers, and so forth. Please, please, please don't take this session and think, I already know all that, I'm not going to go to those things. They will be in much more depth than we've had the opportunity in our time today to be able to go into. Take advantage of those things. There are also some good websites, frankly, that have really detailed information. Some of them are pay sites, or at least trying to encourage you, but like some websites like JD Advising is one that a lot of people know about that has some in front of the paywall type details about how to do outlines and so forth. If you want to be thinking before you actually arrive at law school, there's some good books about how to succeed in law school. I wouldn't rely on movies for teaching you how to succeed in law school. I mean, some movies about law school will entertain you, like Legally Blonde, and some movies about law school will scare the crap out of you, like Paper Chase. But neither of those will really teach you much about what you need to know. So please take advantage of those in the future. We were originally scheduled for this to be an hour, and I don't want to hang on to our panelists longer than they're willing to stay. But if they're willing to stay for another 10 or 15 minutes to answer some questions, if you're free, that's great. If you have to leave, please feel free to do so. And same for our attendees. Before I turn it over to students to ask questions, opportunity for each of our panelists. What's something I didn't ask you about that you just want to tell UCF students about law school? And Michael, let's start with you this time.
I know you mentioned this earlier, but I did want to emphasize the first semester grades thing. And it's not at all uncommon for your first semester grades are what determines, because right now we don't have our second semester grades yet. So that determines if you get a summer job, and then that summer job will ask you back for the second year if you did a good job. And then if whatever job you have your second year is kind of the assumption is that you'll stick with them once you graduate. So I mean, and of course, if you don't do great your first semester, you can rebound and do better and still get a job. But if you have awesome first semester grades, that's going to set you up. I mean, you will probably have at least one offer that will roll over into your second summer, and then you can have your job stuff figured out just from one semester of grades, which I think has the potential to take a lot of pressure off of the grading aspect in your subsequent semesters, because you've kind of already shown what you're doing. So I would just definitely highlight that and say that obviously you're going to take it seriously anyway, but that first semester is where I think you get the most bang for your buck for really focusing and performing well in your exams.
Great, thanks. Rachel, what about you? Anything you want to say before we turn it over to questions?
Yeah, as much as there is such a strong emphasis on grades and performing well, which obviously should be your number one priority, it's important not to exclude everything else. Involvement in the time of COVID is a little difficult, but if there are opportunities that your school's offering, like 1L competitions or other clubs that interest you, especially in the area of law that you might be interested in going into, join them and participate. Really put yourself out there. It'll help you meet people that could potentially be study partners down the road. And it really makes you have a more enjoyable time. So you're not cooped up in your office or in the library, just work all the time, because this type of involvement challenges you to put yourself out there, makes you more confident, and can help you with different opportunities that you might not expect.
Thank you. Theresa?
Yeah, real quick, I want to echo what Rachel just said. I think it is so important to get involved with your law school's organizations, like really getting down to meet people, especially in a time of COVID. Hopefully you guys don't experience that fall, but, really start involving yourself with people. But I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that I want to give to everyone, as well as this analogy that's like, as a 1L you are, or a 1L, especially a law student, you are a kitten, and everybody loves kittens. Once you're a lawyer, you're a cat, and nobody wants a cat. Everybody wants a kitten. So take advantage of your cute kittenness and put yourself out there. Call people. If you're on LinkedIn or you're interested in something, hey, I saw your post, I'm really interested. Would you want to sit down and do a virtual coffee chat? Especially now that we're in the virtual world, there's so many opportunities. Take advantage of it. Go to your professor's office hours. They don't expect you to know anything. Ask questions. Now is the time to ask questions, because once you're an attorney, it's going to be a little harder. So take advantage of that and really just expose yourself to as much as you can, especially while people are willing to help you. So that's the biggest piece of advice that I think I could offer.
That's awesome advice and very true, Theresa. Thanks so much. All right, now we're going to turn it over to questions from our audience. If you have a question, if you kind of either clap or put it in the chat, now that I'm not talking, I will watch the chat as well. I'd like to first open up the opportunity to ask questions to people who actually are attending law school this fall. And then if they don't have any questions, or if there isn't anyone who's attending law school this fall, we'll open up to everybody. But if you can somehow through Zoom raise your hand, clap, give me some kind of sign you want to ask a question, I'll call on you and we'll go from there. Nobody has any questions?
Professor Merriam, there's a few questions in the chat as well.
Great. So I see Jake's question. Let me jump in there. Any tips for determining whether a law school is more competitive or collegial? Any ideas? I'll let any of the panelists jump in on that.
So I'll hop in on this because I think that my little spiel earlier may have been a little bit intimidating. I think a lot of times it's strictly based on the students that are in your section. There are other sections that I'm not in here at Stetson that have a much different perspective, and they are a little bit more collegial. But my section in particular, I don't know what it is, but there's a lot of competition going on. So if you go to a school that maybe has a reputation for being a little bit more friendly, you never know who's going to be in your incoming class, and of that incoming class, who's going to be in your section and in your classes. That's kind of going to determine that culture a little bit more.
Another suggestion, I know it kind of varies by law school, but another suggestion would be to just try to find some students who are at that law school now that you can talk to, whether that's through UCF alumni. We've got a pretty good alumni network now of students all over the place, and just ask those questions. Sometimes people who aren't at those schools know about the reputation of those schools. There are some schools that for decades have had reputations as being collegial, some schools that for decades have had reputations as being ultra competitive. Those are probably self-fulfilling reputations now, because the collegial people go to the collegial schools and the people who are more focused on competition perhaps go somewhere else. But actually reaching out and figuring out how, and if you're having trouble talking to an actual student, contact the admissions office at that law school that you're thinking about going to and saying, I just want to talk to a student or two students. You can connect me with somebody who will talk to me and answer my questions, and then you can get a sense from them. But Jake, I think your question is really important, and there are ways to do that, but it's going to require you kind of reaching out and finding people. Jan asked a question: how do student-professor relationships work? What are some differences between the way you develop a relationship with a law school professor and an undergrad professor? Anybody want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I could jump in. I think it really is up to you, and also the school. I know I can only speak for Marquette, but when I speak for Marquette, I can say that professors are extremely open to speaking to the students and creating those relationships. You know, from the get-go, everyone's like, you know, we're building you up to be our future colleague. So if you have any questions, ask us. Like there's, you know, so I feel like it's at that point, if that's the environment that you find yourself in with your law school, it's up to you to go to their office hours, you know, talk to them. If you have any questions, like be there, because they're there to teach. And if they'll teach, and then once they're done teaching, they'll leave, you know. If it's it's up to you to go that extra step, go to their office hours, ask them questions after, you know, go up to the podium. Hey, like, what did this mean? So I think, again, depending on your school, at Marquette here, I think, you know, I have a meeting with my professor from last semester. I was like, hey, I'd love to chat. Do you have time? I'm like, yeah, here are my office hours. You know, it's really up to you to take that step. But for the most part, in my experience, their professors are extremely open to, you know, being friends, or, you know, have a relationship with their students. If they want to be friends, they could be friends too. I know one of our professors went out for a beer, you know, before COVID with a group of students to ask, you know, just put yourself out there, especially as a 1L, like I said. I think you could absolutely nurture and create those relationships as a law student.
Awesome. Michael, I saw you were about to jump in too.
Yeah, I was just going to echo on that. I mean, all your professors, like when they're not teaching classes, they're doing research in the subject matter that they're teaching about. So they're really excited about what they're dealing with. So if you go to their office hours and are interested in talking about either their research or just the subject matter in class, I mean, they're excited about, oh, you want to hear about, you know, this weird provision in the 14th Amendment? Let me tell you. And they'll talk about it for hours. So it definitely is not hard. If you're enthusiastic about the subject matter or you want clarification on it, I think they're universally very excited to talk about it, because that's what they do for a living, is learn about that area of the law.
We professors are law dorks. So if you want to be a dork with us, we welcome that. Alejandro asks, how important do you think a law school's bar pass rate is in determining which law school to attend, or do you believe it is all on the student? Any thoughts on that from the panel? I have some, but I'll pitch to you all first.
If you come to Wisconsin, you don't have to worry about the bar.
Oh, there's
we
an
have diploma privilege.
Yeah, little known reality. If you graduate from a Wisconsin law school, you do not have to take the bar in order to practice in Wisconsin. Other thoughts on the topic?
I haven't thought about it that much. I was just going to mention that I would say it's pretty much all on the student. I would also say it kind of depends on what kind of school it is, because many schools are like a school like Duke, for example, probably 95% of the people who go to Duke do not stay in North Carolina. So I think also there's a lot of schools that don't teach specifically to the state bar. I know at WashU, we don't talk about Missouri law ever. I don't intend to stay in Missouri. And so I think that would at least be a factor to think about when you're looking at bar passage rate, is that a lot of schools, if they're not like a regional school, I don't know if that information would be very helpful. But yeah, I think it's pretty much all in the student. A lot of people also take bar prep courses after they complete law school for the state they want to practice in. And I would think that's probably the more important element of being prepared.
Which is crazy, right? Like you spend 3 years going to law school, spending a ton of money, a ton of time. And then what really determines whether you pass the bar is the 3-month bar prep Barbary course that you take. But that is reality. Law school is really about teaching you how to think like a lawyer. In some instances now, getting a little bit more practical advice on how to practice law. But frankly, that's a new innovation, that law school is supposed to teach you how to practice law. And it's aimed at helping you pass the bar directly. I tend to think that the bar passage rates don't really you can get a great law education at any school in the country. I think those bar passage rates perhaps have more to do with the quality of the students who are attending. And so that kind of answers your question Alejandro, it's on the student, right? It's up to you whether you're going to pass the bar exam. Also the point Michael made is an important one, particularly schools that attract students from across the country. It's not necessarily the best students at that school who are staying in that state to practice afterwards. And so sometimes those schools that have a national draw have slightly lower bar passage rates than maybe another school in the same state. And not necessarily because the law school is not as good or because the students aren't as good, but for that other reason that many students from that school actually leave that state and don't practice there. Ileana says, what was the biggest shock when adjusting to the culture of law? Or the culture of law school? Any big shocks?
I think we've already all talked about this a great deal, but just the amount of work and kind of the feeling of always feeling like you're right about to be behind is one of the biggest shocks, because I never felt like that in undergrad, no matter how much I didn't prepare.
Yeah, I agree with that. In undergrad, I did good, but I cannot tell you a time that I sat down and studied. I was one of those students. I just read over it, maybe went over a quiz once and went to a test. Of course, not in Professor Merriam's class, never.
No.
In general, never. In general, that was my experience in undergrad. So it was a big shock to me to, drill into my head. I have to sit down and study for this, not just once, but consistently throughout the semester. So I think it's just, in your head making that switch, like this is a reality. Like you have to be consistent and sit down and commit yourself to law school, because it's a very different thing. So I think that was the biggest shock for me. It's like I need to sit down and read and study, not just once, but many times. So yeah.
Anyone else want to jump in there? All right, Perry asks, how important are extracurriculars in law school?
I think very important. Extracurriculars have kind of been the hallmark of my experience this first year. I was able to compete and win some competitions that gave me some great opportunities to be on advocacy boards next year. It was also through these extracurriculars that I was able to find summer job opportunities through older students who are graduating and leaving those positions. And I just asked one of the 3Ls that I worked with throughout the competition, hey, what should I be doing this summer? And he was like, hey, I'm about to give notice to my job, and it would be great if you are interested in this. And I was like, well, that was certainly easier than I expected. So I think extracurriculars really are very important to get you involved with students that could help you learn, give you advice, give you jobs maybe, and also get to meet some of the faculty that might not teach first year classes.
And Rachel's being a bit modest. She won the 1L moot court competition at her law school, which in my opinion is probably the most significant competition as a 1L that you can win. And so congratulations to Rachel. Other thoughts from the other panelists on that extracurricular question?
I totally agree with what Rachel said. I was going to mention, we haven't said law journal yet. Most schools have several journals. The like flagship journal is usually called the Law Review, and that any of them are great, but definitely involvement on that, especially if you want to do something like a clerkship, or if you want to do academia, those are very highly regarded, and you should definitely, I think, join at least one of them. And I've heard it's a great experience. You can't join it until 2L, at least for us, but very popular.
Yeah, I actually had that in my notes to talk about with regard to professional success, and I blew right over it. But one of the elements of professional success is figuring out what your potential future employers want to see. And some of them are going to want to see the extracurriculars that we're talking about. Oh, you want to be a trial lawyer? Were you on the trial team? You want to be a judicial clerk? Did you do law review, as Michael just mentioned? Those kinds of things. So I think you want to be an appellate lawyer. How come you didn't do moot court while you're in law school as an extracurricular activity? I think it's important to start early in figuring out what those potential employers want to see. I did some extracurriculars in law school myself that don't help you get a job necessarily. The school I went to is known as a softball law school. And I was actually on 4 different teams in 4 different leagues, all of which were run by the law school during my 1L year. But those are not the extracurricular activities that you should be focused on when you're looking for professional success. That said, I built some relationships there, and I ultimately landed a job where the partner who hired me had himself been a big softball player at my law school. And so maybe it did help me after all. Theresa, do you want to say anything about extracurriculars?
Yeah, I think extracurriculars are extremely important. I knew I wanted to join as many as I can. I think I'm in like 5 different orgs right now. It's just some are social, some are, like Association of Women Lawyers, which have a professional chapter. So those are really important too, because you can get that connection with your professional chapter. And, again, in putting yourself out there, like you could run for an e-board even as a 1L. Like you might think, oh, there's no way, but, the little things you do add up, and your participation and, the Hispanic Law School Lawyer Association, you could get these connections. I volunteered at a DACA clinic helping people renew their applications. These are things that get you doing, you could do community work, get involved in the community, especially like me. I'm not from Milwaukee. I went to UCF, These little extracurricular organizations are going to help you expose yourself to the community and start meeting people. So I think they're incredibly important. And also, going back to grades are important, but they're not everything. If you meet someone that has like straight A's, which are very rare, but let's say they do, versus someone that has, something less, but they were involved in all these things, helping out the community, doing pro bono work if you have the opportunity, that stands out. You're getting practical legal experience instead of just, your head in a book 24/7. So I think it's really important to measure. Obviously, don't overwhelm yourself, but pick out the things that you're interested in and take advantage of that. If the school offers it, you're paying for it anyway, so you might as well join and, get that enjoyment and experience out of it. So I think it's very important.
That's great. And I think not only is it, and you've kind of alluded to this already, a couple of you, but not only is it important from a resume building, right? Like I did this and you can put that on your resume, and I did this and you can put that on your resume. It's the connections. I know Theresa has made connections at extracurricular activities or functions where you just start talking with somebody and, oh, this turns out to be this really important person in the law who, because I'm a cute kitten right now, wants to help me. And now she's going to connect me with the job that she's aware of over here. Like that isn't magic. That's not Hallmark movie stuff. That's how a lot of people get their jobs. And so if you find yourself as a student only, isolated in your room, studying all the time, getting those great grades, but you're not actually meeting people, you're taking away one of your own really strong ways to both find a job, but also to just enjoy, the profession in which you have embarked. I really think that one important kind of summary of a lot of the things that we've said is that the time to start thinking about the fact you have entered the legal profession is at the beginning of law school, not at the end of law school. In other words, transition from being a student to being a professional as you enter law school. Now you're in the legal profession, and treat it that way, rather than thinking, well, 3 years from, I'm still a student, I'm still going to live the student life, and 3 years from now, I'll start worrying about that. And again, I don't want to add stress, but just like act as though it's your job, and this is what you want to do for the rest of your life. And so you're treating it that way. I don't see any other questions in the chat, and nobody else has raised their hand. So I think we'll end there. We are over time already anyway. I want to again thank our panelists, Michael McWaters, who's coming to us from Washington University in St. Louis, and show us your shirt so we can have the visual reminder. There he is. Theresa Correa Gonzalez is coming to us from Marquette University. Show us your shirt. And Rachel, who is coming to us from Stetson, but is the covert Stetson student today, from Stetson here in Florida. Thanks to all three of you for being willing to spend your precious time. Now that we've talked about how important time is in law school, you guys better get back to it. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. And again, Mr. Shank, thanks for setting this all up. Thanks everyone for attending, and we'll talk to you soon.